Hi everyone. We're here with the Myanmar Tim Lab team from the summer of 2017. I'd like to start by asking the group to go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Antonio Mora. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Hi, my name is Belinda Chu. I'm from the United States and I was born in Minneapolis.
Hello, my name is Gregory Newman, born and raised in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA.
Hi, my name is Kayla McNamara. I'm from Big Bear Lake, California in the United States.
Hi, my name is Allison Shannon. I am from Fort Worth, Texas, USA.
Thanks, guys. I'll ask you, Greg, why don't you tell us about your client, because you had a multi-level sort of client system here. Tell us about your client and what they were trying to achieve with this project.
Sure. Our client was Winrock International, who was part of the VCRD program, Value Chain for Rural Development, in Myanmar. A couple different value chains in a couple different agricultural sectors. Two of them that we experienced were ginger and soybeans. For the ginger side, we worked with a company called Myanmar Agribusiness Group. That was mainly Antonio and Belinda's project. And on the soybean side, we worked with Yangon Nike Beans products, and that was focused with the work done by Allison and Kayla.
Perfect. So then, Winrock is federally funded by the United States government. Their objective was to strengthen these value chains in these industries. And then you had these specific clients. So why don't I go to each team then, and I'll start with Allison and Kayla. Then tell us more about Nike Beans and why they wanted you there, at least the initial sort of project scope.
So the initial project scope was to go and understand the challenges that a very ambitious businesswoman, Malele, was facing in her marketing efforts, in upgrading her accounting and bookkeeping systems, and also just day-to-day business operations. And so we went in very eager to help her set some structures in place, some processes to really take her business to the next level. She's at the top of her game in terms of all of the other tofu manufacturers in her class. She's in grocery stores, she's working with restaurants, but she has to move more quickly if she's going to keep up with the market.
Thanks. And then with the Myanmar Agribusiness Group, they were in several lines of production. Same question to you guys.
Go for it.
Okay, I guess. So we were working with Myanmar Agribusiness Group, and he has several lines of businesses, but the main one that we were focusing on was ginger and the agricultural arm of his business. And we were really looking at how do we add value to the value chain for ginger. So that includes, he sources the ginger from farmers, local farmers in Myanmar, and the ginger goes to his factory where he does a lot of the processing and the washing and the cleaning. And then that ginger then goes out to his end clients. And so we examined the entire process to look for ways to improve his business and to help him take it to the next level.
Fantastic. Okay. Let's go back and forth. We'll go back to the Nike Beans now. Let's talk about the discovery process, because you came in with a scope. We know this is a kind of a difficult culture to build trust in. How did you go about in your discovery process finding out what's the true sort of current nature of this organization, Nike Beans, trying to get to what they really needed?
I think a big part of that was outlining what their objectives were, both long-term and short-term. Looking at the one-year picture versus the five-year picture. When speaking with Malele, for her five-year implementation goals, she wanted to really make an impact in the modern market. The modern being the city marts, the orange, major supermarkets that are more client and customer facing, whereas the traditional market lends to how it's been currently, a 90% share actually. And just through this discovery phase, asking her how we can help her with better aligning her business practices to tailor to both of those areas, both the traditional and the modern markets, and how they operate both similarly and differently. And in regards to the trust piece, trying to facilitate how to better implement structure in the internal business to really create this more tangible way of working with middle management and reporting structure.
Now, did that, based on what we just said, was that Nike wanted to work on, their sort of marketing and production. Did you at that point then need to, after learning about the business, did you need to refine the scope?
I would say absolutely we had to refine the scope, and that happened up until the last phase of the project. So we started organizational structure, which carried through. That was one of the things that really carried through the project. But when we got to the marketing bit, we realized that it wasn't just helping her make a brochure, but it was redefining her brand completely. And that wasn't what we had initially envisioned. As Kayla mentioned, we had a traditional market where she sells her product directly to brokers, that goes to a wet market, she loses quality control. It's very price sensitive. So really there's no marketing efforts there. On the other side, these modern markets, she'll produce those products in the factory. That factory will be HACCP certified, health and safety certified, and all of those products need a new image. They need a new image to separate themselves from the lower quality products in the traditional markets and really kind of move up market to speak to those higher end consumers. So that was a big shift that we, like I said, really got to in the last week. Also, grain standards. So she sources part of her grains directly from farmers. And we didn't know how much of a challenge that was until the final weeks. So we worked with the Winrock team to help develop grain standards documents, what she was looking for and what the farmers were able to provide. And then helped her develop some brochures to give to the farmers to help them understand those specifications, and a process flow to really take her through how to test the farmer's grain for meeting her expectations and meeting what they had promised to her.
Okay, so definitely a refinement of scope. Now
Yeah.
help me here. I'll start this and you help me. Let's do that if we had to do it in bullet points. There are grain standards, and
Yes.
you guys take it from there.
Grain standards, process flow. We also have a marketing brochure. And also we refined some job descriptions for her to take away.
Guidance on building partnerships based on the credibility she's building in the market, and also opportunities for new partnerships with restaurants, with the Restaurant Association as well, hotels, and just really putting her brand out front in a new way, new packaging, new messaging.
Okay, MABG. Let's see, same question. Almost forgot the question by now. How did you go about refining the scope with MABG? You found out a lot about this client, and we should name Myatu, the owner of the MABG.
So we made a lot of effort to go out to his facility. It's about an hour outside of the city in the industrial area. So we really wanted to get out there and build that relationship with him. And we were out there, I think, 3 times the first week, and then multiple times each week after that. Initially, we were a little bit confused because he had so many businesses going on, and we didn't know if we were supposed to kind of help all of them or just help one of them. We narrowed that down to ginger, and we decided we were going to try and implement some stuff that maybe could be applicable all across the board. When we first spoke with him, he was really interested in marketing, and we thought that he just needed more buyers. We dug a little bit deeper, and we realized that he needed a whole lot of things to increase his capacity to be able to supply more buyers. And that went from his infrastructure to his sterilizing machine to his powdering machine. And as far as changing the scope of it, maybe you guys can help me. It started out with infrastructure, and then it went down to operations, organizational development, business metrics. Am I missing one? I think there were 5.
But really, as Antonio said, to dig deeper, it was really based on the conversations that we've had with Myatu. And then Myatu would mention, this person might be good to talk to. And so we would go to that person and gather more information. And then they might have another contact to talk to. And so it was continuing to connect the dots and really get almost like a 360 view of what was going on. And that was a huge part of the discovery phase.
So there's some similarities here. Greg, I'll go to you because you sort of played the team lead, but also worked with both teams. So you saw some of maybe the similarities and the differences between these two clients. one thing that's jumping out to me, was the level of trust. You both mentioned trust, building trust with your client, and the importance of doing that. So I wanted to ask, what were some of the things you felt were really critical to building that trust, and then did that open up new doors and unlock things for you? How did that impact the rest of the project?
Yeah, trust is probably the number one word, the number one thing we needed to establish, and the way to connect with our client. On the MABG side, it was being there. It was kind of spending the face time with him. It was getting to know Myatsu, his idiosyncrasies, his ins and outs, and him getting to know us at the same time. With that time came the exchange of ideas. Seeing the light bulb go off in his head a couple times really kind of clued him in that, we knew what we were doing and we were able to help him out. We were there for his benefit. On the Nike side, a lot of the trust was built as the relationship matured. There was a little bit more of a translation barrier, so we did have a translator on the Nike side. So working through the translators, the different translators, really to get what we wanted to do and what the girls and I wanted to get across to Malele. And once she understood that we kind of were both on the same page, especially with the branding issue that came up at the end, there was a lot of trust built in kind of inherently, and we were able to get off some ideas on the very last day, even, that hopefully she'll be running with long after our presence is gone, but the Nike business is still there.
Let me ask about translation, because I know that was a challenge, we'll put it, in the project. And it is for many, many TIMLab teams, consulting teams in a foreign country. Question being, why was that challenging? But then more pointedly, how did you push through it? What did you do to keep working through some of those barriers and get it what you needed to do?
So I want to build on what Gregory was saying about trust. Developing trust with the translators was almost as important, if not more important, than building trust with our client. So we worked very closely with the gentleman that was one of the leads on the soy side of the project. It was fantastic. He knew everything about soy. He could bite into a soybean and tell you what the moisture content was. We learned so much in the beginning from him, and developing that relationship was key. But as we moved to working with other translators, we realized the different styles, the different levels of trust, the different types of communication. And we were able to extract different learnings from all of them. But building that trust with each of them, I think, was key to getting what we needed, getting what we were looking for.
Yeah, and as far as kind of overcoming those challenges, I think the biggest one is continuing to alter the approach for asking questions and being very culturally sensitive to the way you ask the questions, because it ties into the trust piece as well. As long as you're very clear and upfront with what your objectives are, particularly with the translator, we would have hour-long conversations in the car ride prior to meeting with our client, and that time was really critical to maintaining not only the relationship, but also the understanding of what we're trying to get out of the meeting that we're about to have.
Okay. Now, at the risk of repeating ourselves, which would be fine, but let's do the recommendations one more time. Let's think about impact on the client right now. What were, let's say, take maybe the top 3 leave behind, concrete things that you left your client that you think are really going to have an impact on their business going forward. And I'll stick with you guys because this is the order we've been going in.
I think the number one thing, and this came out in the last few weeks, was a grain specifications guide, which led into a contract between Malele and the farmers about what type of grain she was expecting, what type of grain that they were able to provide, and what the ramifications of not providing that quality of grain, what happened next. And that makes things clear. There was a lack of clarity before, and she wasn't getting what she needed. So I think that was huge, and leaving behind an information sheet to give to farmers for them to know. And then I'll let Kayla talk about this a little bit, but there was some process and some organization behind it, I think, that'll really make enforcing that possible.
Yeah, so taking what Allison said as far as creating that overall transparency and clarity, on the specifications needed for the raw supply of material was critical, but also it translates into how she processes that raw supply in her factory. So one of the things too that we wanted to take away take away from this experience and operate it into a leave behind was a process flow chart that's very, very well aligns with the HACCP standards. So essentially what it does is it allows her to look at what kinds of internal steps she needs to take, what that process flow looks like, and how she can better train her employees, particularly the quality control manager or a plant manager, on how to move forward in really creating this awareness for quality internally in the factory. Moving on to a second piece too and kind of lends to that quality piece is really implementing a clear organizational structure and better utilizing the people she has in her staff. She has 2 factories now. One is currently being built and plans to open in October. So creating an org structure that would better suit her needs and efficiencies, both for the traditional and the modern market, was really critical. And also allowing her to see what other tofu manufacturers or other companies are requiring from their employees and creating these job descriptions or suggestions on what their qualifications should be. And then I'll let you take away the third one.
I think that was 3. I mean, I think that really summarized it. You know, the grain specifications. How does she test for? What is the process for testing and verifying that? And who in our organization is responsible, and how can she manage those people? I think they all really worked in tandem to create a good set of leave-behinds.
Now I want to stay on that just for a second before we go over to MABG, because I'm going to ask you to tell me a story about Nyunchen and the grain specifications and when that was sort of illustrated to you very viscerally in front of your own eyes, if you don't mind.
We shouldn't be laughing.
This is
really tragic.
alarming.
Thank you. So I'll lead it and you could give it
Sure.
the gory details.
Sure.
But Nanshen was our translator for the better part of the project. And like I said before, he can bite a soybean and he could tell you, what's the moisture content. He even tell you what variety of soybean it was, how old it was. He was on point with the soybean quality. So Mailele had received a batch of very poor quality beans from Kachin State in the north. And he took a chance on finding a soybean, and from there.
Yeah, so his goal was to test the moisture content, which is done by, as Allison mentioned, biting into the grain, without knowing that this particular poor quality grain had been submerged or had a phosphine tablet in the batch, which is highly toxic to the human. And what ended up happening was he had a really adverse reaction immediately. He began sweating and had a really bad headache. And I could tell that something was off. Poor guy, he really wanted to power through because he was there to help facilitate us. And this was, I think, in our 4th week. So he knew that time was of the essence, but at one point he had to stop the meeting and let us know that he really was ill. And the issue too is that there's no way of really testing that prior to submerging it in your mouth or actually doing a chemical phosphine test. So that was what really triggered our awareness of how critical it was, because not only was he going to be ill, but if this grain was used for the tofu, it could potentially lead to other illness or adverse reactions or effects to the populace. So in the market, it would be a really, really big issue.
And we learned that she did actually use those, sadly, she did actually use those beans, and she offered us cubes of tofu that day to take home, and I was like, no,
Yeah.
I think we're fine.
Fortunately, though, we were reassured after probing a little bit more in our questions, because based on our concern with this, that in the tofu processing steps, the water is rushed over, and at a high temperature, it does clear out a lot of that chemical residue. So hopefully,
feel a little better. It was washed.
It
at
was
least.
washed. It was.
Yeah.
It had gone through the entire process. So
And it's being tested now, actually, by Winrock. So Winrock's taken it to an independent chemical test to determine, what phosphine and what other chemicals were those in.
All right, thanks for that. One of the, I think, wilder lab stories from the field, because Nianchen is still, he needed to take a week or two of sick leave.
it's about a
He
week.
still didn't just
Yeah.
bounce back right away.
Yeah.
It's pretty intense. Well, then, okay, over to MABG then, and I'll restate the question because it's been a few minutes, but if you had to say your top 3, maybe 4 really tactical recommendations, leave-behinds with Miyatu, what were those? And I'll ask us, and then maybe I'll ask you the question, and how did he react to some of those things, positively, negatively, and might come back to you all, although we sort of got a tangible illustration of the importance of grain. But yeah, maybe your top 3 or 4 really tactical recommendations.
Sure, I think the top 3, and maybe I'll tee them up. Business metrics, which kind of one I took a little pride in reaching out to Miyatu for, but also the operations, org development, as well as the infrastructure and the needs there. So those 3 things. As for the business metrics, it really keyed into me that he didn't really know the cost of production. Such a big, important figure for any business. Miyatu had different customers, specifically a customer called Ekama. That was his only ginger customer. And with that relationship, Miyatu was kind of okay with letting Ekama run the show a little bit and understand all the numbers and tell him just how much he had to or he should negotiate and buy the ginger for. And he didn't really have any argument or come back with anything else. He would just kind of say, that's my number? Sure, that's my number. And that's what he went to market for. So there was no, again, cost of production numbers. He had no benchmarking. He had no KPIs. He had no really idea what businesses made money or lost money. So it was really hard to kind of advise someone who just doesn't really have a handle on the numbers. So business metrics for me was one of the key recommendation leave-behinds for him.
And I'll talk a little bit about the infrastructure. So when we went there and throughout the 5 weeks that we were out there, the factory was constantly under construction. And so every time we visited, it looked different. And there were new floors put in or new walls and partitions going up. So we knew that infrastructure was really important because through our discovery phase, we found that infrastructure and capacity were actually some limitations to his business at that time. So Miyatu actually was not able to meet all of the demand at the time because one of the machines that they had was a sterilizing machine. And they were putting the ginger into the sterilizing machine, but the trays that they were in were really tall. And so this was limiting the capacity of how much ginger they could put through it. And so one of the recommendations that we did make to him and his team was to explore having shorter trays that would allow them to double their capacity. So this would allow them to get twice as much ginger through the sterilizing machine and out to their customers.
For the organizational development, basically Miyatu had multiple businesses, and it was him at the top and workers at the bottom. There was no in between. There was no managers that he could have him help out with operations in each division. There was no assistant. And so initially when we recommended that he implement some type of organizational structure, he was really resistant and he wanted to have control in all of his businesses, and he didn't see a need to change anything. But by week 5, he realized that he did need to change and adjust some things, and maybe just small steps with just an assistant, or maybe implementing managers in each one of his businesses. But he did realize that, and we put that down in paper, and that was something that he was interested in changing.
Yeah, I'll dig on that a little bit because he was like a one-man show, and you all found that there was really an opportunity cost to, well, tell us about the secret shopper little experiment.
Yeah. So we created a fake account on Facebook because Facebook is where he does most of his business, which is pretty typical for Myanmar. Facebook is their internet. So we created a fake account on there, and his name was John Mallard. We sent him a request asking for a price on chili. Within an hour, he read the message. He never replied, and throughout our whole trip, he never replied. So you can tell from that he does. The way he's doing business, he's losing out on opportunities to gain more business and make more money, and that was one of the big problems that we saw.
you even found, I think at one point, that Walmart had come calling for an order, and there was no one home, essentially,
Yeah.
to meet with them.
So yeah, so Walmart would be a big opportunity for him, and Myanmar is a perfect opportunity because what they were looking for was dried mango, and Myanmar, they produce mangoes year round because of the climates in the south, the middle, and in the north, so they could supply dried mango year round, and Miyatu could have been more proactive with that and gotten a sample in sooner, but I think it wasn't until week 5 that he actually sent in the sample. So it's just one of those things where if he was more on top of things and more proactive, he could probably get business done a lot quicker. And you never know, that Walmart opportunity might not be sitting around by the time that sample gets in.
We also found, you have to tell our audience here about how he handled sourcing, and literally, driving his vehicles around to handle sourcing from the farm gate, which could be just multiple hours away from the factory, right? What did you? I mean, just tell me real quick. He was driving the truck. How many hours?
Yeah, I think the whole number, the grand number was 22 hours. So we did a roles and responsibilities inventory with him and asked him, what are you doing on a day-to-day basis? And one of the things was he goes and gets the raw materials. But what happens is he will drive his car out to the farm, and then he's got to stay overnight, and then he rents a truck and drives all the materials back to the factory, which is like another 9 hours. So the grand total was about 22 hours if, he said, none of the vehicles broke down.
Which is not a given
Which-
in this.
So we touched on it earlier. If I had to ask, and it's because you already gave the answer, your number one most impactful recommendation was if he would take you up on the assistant.
Yeah, we saw that as one of the higher priorities, because if he did get an assistant, all of our other recommendations could kind of fall into place and be facilitated a lot more easier. He did seem like he was open for that. Gregory wrote up a description for what an assistant would need to do and need to be qualified for the position. So we're hoping that he does do that fairly quickly.
And then if I jump back over to Nike Beans, we talked about this earlier. We talked about the importance of correct sourcing via contracts, and now I can't remember if you mentioned it already, but in the final week of your project, something happened,
Yes.
which
So
was a good breakthrough.
yeah, so we did learn that she was open to new branding, and that was something that was also a continued discovery, because initially, and I guess I should say a shift of scope, because initially we were under the impression that she was not too keen on the idea of rebranding, even though unfortunately her logo is taken from Nike, the swoosh actually. So I'll let Allison talk more about the approach to that.
Yeah, so the idea really started with this division that she set up between traditional markets and modern markets, traditional production in her old factory, modern production in her new factory, and thinking, the quality is so different, the inputs are so different. Why don't we treat these things differently? A traditional market, price-sensitive product, an up-market, quality-sensitive product. And where do we take that? We were thrilled enough that there was a separation, and that one factory would be certified to food, safety standards, and the other one, it didn't matter so much because of traditional market. And then actually Gregory really went for it. I guess he hadn't been in those meetings in the first few weeks where we were told to kind of back off on the marketing, and just went right for it. What are you willing to separate these brands? And her response was, yeah, I've already been thinking about doing that. In fact, I already have ideas about what the logo should look like and what the slogan should be. And yeah, I think my packaging should be more modern and European. So it was, I think all three of us kind of jumped up in our seats and were like, this is what we've been waiting for.
Yeah.
But it was a great discovery. It was rewarding. It's just, I think, unfortunate that we didn't have more time to build that out and really leave behind something more for her to move in that direction.
Because one thing you found, I'll just deviate into it just a second, because it was an interesting learning point. I mean, you stamp the tofu when it comes off the line, and, and that stamp is how people in the marketplace identify the tofu. But yet she was selling at a wholesale level where she would lose control of the quality as soon as it sort of left, but it still had the stamp on it.
Yeah.
So you could put it in different packaging, but ultimately the consumer, when they get that home, they could get something that's been sitting around for 36 hours, still has that stamp on it, even though it's not her product anymore.
Yeah, and the danger was that, so the modern markets would sell cube tofu, but they would go to the traditional markets because it's a lower end product. They would work with different brokers. They would buy the cubes, bring them in-house, and repackage them. Well, we visited a ton of City Marts, and the only brand, save for once, that we saw of repackaged cube tofu was her brand. So we bought some, and we sliced it up in the kitchen, and it smelled like cheese. It was discolored. It was disgusting. So that kind of also was impetus for how can we make this separation.
Very interesting. Okay, now I'll ask, as I ask you guys, sort of the if you had to leave one recommendation with the client, the most impactful, and I just wanted, I think we sort of already know because you mentioned already the grain specification and that sort of transparency in the supply chain, and I just wanted you to talk about I think as a or hopefully as a realization of that, the contract then that happened in the last week of your project.
Yeah, so kind of stemming from the quality control on the front end of the supply chain with the farmers and sourcing raw grain that is of standards to Malele. There was also this realization that this contract that was being drawn up with a Winrock facilitator, he's a senior technician on the soy side and based in Tanji. He was drawing up this contract to better align on that transparency, but he also realized too that he could use this type of form to provide to Lele for her relationship with the brokers as well on more of the client, or the customer facing side. Although the quality of the grain, the cubes at the broker level is out of her control, whether they put formalin into the water, she can now put into place this legal binding document saying that she is not responsible for this act of putting in toxic chemicals post-production. So hopefully this will really enable her to be empowered on how to realize that you can implement these quality checks on both sides of the supply chain and get it through to your customer in a very hygienic way.
And we were thrilled to find out the last day of the project, in the evening that we were leaving, that the contract had been signed by both Malele and the farmers. The farmers got the price they wanted. She's getting the quality she wants. And I think it's a really positive step forward for her.
Perfect. I think that's a great way to leave the project.
Yeah.
With that, let's move into personal and professional takeaways. So just on both fronts, and we'll go left to right again. Why not? Or your right to left. So personally or professional, both, or pick one. Where did you find that you really had to grow and learn something about yourself?
So for me, what I learned on the trip was how important personal relationships are in the discovery process. You have to let people get comfortable with you before they can open up and kind of just feel comfortable to give you the information that you need to help them. Also, just that there's not a one answer to the solution. There's a lot of moving parts, there's a lot of things going on, and you have to look at the whole business from a different perspective. And I think those are both things that I can take away in my personal growth, because that's just something that could be applicable in everyday life. And so the experience was great. I enjoyed it. It was fun being in a different country and learning from a different culture, and also growing personally and in the business world.
So my takeaways were, one, being patient, and two, the power of questions. So being patient in the sense that not everything goes at the pace that you might expect it to go at. And there might be layers to peel back and more layers when you thought you already peeled back the layers. And then being able to peel back those layers with questions and asking direct and clear questions that translate across cultures to really get the answer that you're looking for.
Thanks.
And to build on that, questions, just the impact discovery has, you can't stop asking questions. There was something to learn. The ladies talked about it. We saw on the last day, the second to last day, there was a whole new world of branding that opened up in the Nike project. So just to continue to be open to new, to discovery, asking the questions like Belinda said. Being empathetic was kind of a challenge and something I'm kind of glad I personally grew with. This is these people's livelihoods, Malele and Umatu. This is their life. This is going to hopefully provide for their kids, their education. Who knows where it takes them. But to build that trust, we really had to kind of build that relationship with them, that we're there to help them, which we were, and we were there to help ourselves. It was a learning experience. That's why I came to Thunderbird to do TEM, and I'm really glad I did, and I'm glad I did with these 5 people.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest thing was really leveraging those relationships and the partnerships that are presented to you. I think that taking the quality time and enough time with the client was really important to continue on and building that trust. And both professionally and personally, I felt very rewarded with that. Also, too, just similarly to what Belinda said, that patience and understanding that you might have to continue on with this discovery phase and asking these questions because the scope might change, and that's okay. You can really make an impactful discovery even at the end, as we learned.
So professionally, for me, I learned the power of understanding challenges from your client's eyes. So we can do all the businessing we want. We can help them develop structures, but if we don't do that with some sensitivity to how they understand their barriers, how they understand their challenges, I don't think we'll be as successful as we could be. And that takes patience, that takes asking questions, that takes working together. And I think we did a great job of that in the end. We were really able to leave behind some impactful things. And I think, I learned that personally too. We all have different working styles. We all have different ways of engaging problems, moving through the discovery process, and really learning to respect and appreciate those different styles, and learning to work together with, all of them. And that was a big place that I grew.